It is Thursday, April 23rd. 24 hours after Donald Trump's Truth Social post extended the ceasefire, the picture tonight is harder, not easier. The blockade remains. The Iranian container ship is still seized. Tehran has said its decision to stay out of U.S. talks is, in its own word, definitive. The Lebanon ceasefire that took effect April 16 is in its final 48 hours. And this morning, an Israeli strike in the south of Lebanon killed a journalist, the fourth since March, while rescue workers are fired on as they tried to reach her. And in Washington yesterday, the commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command told the Senate that America's magazines are, in his word, finite. One ceasefire, one blockade, one war on pause. And a superpower that has just admitted in sworn Senate testimony that it has fired off a near-peer share of its deep strike and air defense ammunition in 7 weeks of combat against a single mid-sized regional adversary. Tonight, we decode what that means for Iran, for Lebanon, and for the Pakistan-led mediation, now holding all of it together. I'm Zunaira Azhar, and this is Decode, where we define and analyze the stories shaping our world. 3 stories tonight, all connected. First, the ceasefire 48 hours in, the extension Trump announced on Truth Social is holding. The blockade he directed to the U.S. Navy to maintain is also holding. Iran says those two things cannot coexist. Washington is now reportedly giving Tehran 3 to 5 days to show up in Islamabad or face, in the president's own words, renewed attack. Second, Lebanon. A 10-day truce that expires on Sunday, and Israeli military that will not withdraw. 5 people killed in strikes this morning, including a journalist crushed under a building the IDF then denied striking. And a set of first ever direct Lebanese-Israeli ambassador talks opening in Washington tomorrow. And third, a story the Pentagon tried to keep quiet and the Senate forced into daylight yesterday. Nearly half of the American Patriot stockpile, half the THAAD inventory, 45% of precision strike missiles gone in 7 weeks against Iran. 1 year to 4 years to replenish. One of many reasons Pakistan's mediation architecture matters more tonight than it did 24 hours ago. Let's decode all this. 24 hours ago, President Trump extended the U.S.-Iran ceasefire with no expiry date, credited Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif by name, and directed the U.S. military to, in his words, continue the blockade. Today, the White House went further. According to U.S. officials quoted across multiple outlets this morning, Trump has given Iran, quote, 3 to 5 days to engage in negotiations and resolve alleged infighting within the government before resuming attacks, end quote. That is no longer an open extension. That is a deadline wearing different clothes. Tehran's answer came within hours. Foreign Minister spokesman Ismail Bagher, speaking to Iranian state television this morning, described the American decision to stay out of negotiation as, quote, definitive under current conditions. He cited 2 specific reasons. 1, the naval blockade imposed by Trump on April 13th, which Tehran describes as, quote, unlawful and criminal, amounting to war crime and crime against humanity. 2, the continued American refusal to release the Iranian-flagged cargo vessel seized by U.S. naval forces in the Gulf of Oman on Sunday. Bagher said Iran has now informed Pakistan, the principal mediator of these violations. In Islamabad, Pakistan's Foreign Office confirmed this afternoon that Islamabad has formally requested the United States government to end the blockade in what officials described as a renewed push to create the conditions for a second round. The Prime Minister's office said the Prime Minister and the Field Marshal have been in direct contact with their American and Iranian counterparts throughout the day. And in New York, Iran's permanent mission escalated the Tosca file to a full petition before the UN Security Council, demanding condemnation of the seizure and immediate release of the vessel and its crew. The oil markets have noticed. Brent, which fell from $101 a barrel to $88 after the Trump extension post yesterday, is back up above $93 this evening on the 3 to 5 day deadline reporting. Iranian officials have now said in 3 separate briefings today that Tehran will, in the words of a senior Iranian parliamentary member, continue the war if Washington does not accept Iran's terms. The IRGC has resumed the closure of the Strait of Hormuz to traffic it deems ceasefire violating. And the CSIS analysis published 2 days ago, which we will come back to in Story 3, has been sitting on desks in the White House all morning. Let me walk our viewers through what has changed in 24 hours because the shift is important. Yesterday, Trump extended the ceasefire and named Pakistan. The framing was generous, open-ended. Time for Iran to produce a unified proposal, mediation credited publicly. Tonight, the same administration is reportedly giving Tehran 3 to 5 days. That is a window, not an extension. And a window with a blockade attached is not a window Iran can walk through. Tehran has said this publicly, repeatedly, in every available venue, bilateral with Pakistan, trilateral through Islamabad process, multilateral at the United Nations. The Iranian position has not shifted a centimeter. Lift the blockade, release the Tosca, restrain Israel in Lebanon, then we talk. The American position, stripped of the presidential platform, is the opposite. Keep the blockade as leverage. Hold the Tosca, that is the Iranian vessel, as a signal. Let Tel Aviv, Lebanon, what Washington cannot politically do in Iran, and demand Tehran show up anyway. Between these two positions sits Pakistan. Islamabad has done something today that should not be lost in the news cycle. The Foreign Office on the record formally requested the US to end the blockade. That is not a photo opportunity. That is the mediator publicly adopting one side's precondition and asking the other side to meet it. For Pakistan to do this 2 weeks after being thanked by the American president by name is a calibrated move. It tells Tehran that Islamabad's mediation has not collapsed into America's tasking. It tells Washington that the Pakistani assessment of what it is required to restart the talks again on this specific point with the Iranian assessment. And it tells both capitals that the room is still open, but only on conditions Islamabad now considers reasonable. Two other things to note tonight. First, the 3 to 5 day timeline is not a natural figure. It's not even neutral. It is almost exactly the window American defense contractors need to reposition strike assets that were drawn down and rotated during the ceasefire. Read the White House leak and the CENTCOM movement together. And what you see is not a diplomatic clock, it is an operational one. Second, Iran has said on the record through Parliament's National Security Commission that if the US does not its demands, Tehran will, quote, continue the war. That is not rhetorical flourish. That is Iran placing the onus back on Washington and telling both the mediator and the world that if this pause collapses on day 5, the collapse will be American. So the question is no longer whether the extension holds. The question is what Pakistan does with the room it has in the 5 days it has. To force a blockade conversation, neither capital wants to have. We have with us Mr. Hussain Haqqani, who is a Pakistani diplomat, scholar, journalist, and a political commentator. Ambassador Haqqani, thank you so much for joining us. Let me start where yesterday's Truth Social post left off. Trump named Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif by title. Today, Pakistan's Foreign Office has formally asked the United States to end the blockade, in effect, adopting Iran's central precondition. From your reading of Washington, is Islamabad deliberately signaling independence from American tasking, or has the mediator's role simply outgrown what either side originally envisaged?
Pakistan is in a difficult spot. It understands some of Iran's concerns, it understands the US concerns, it's trying to bring the two to the table. But at the same time, it has no leverage with either, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. And usually mediators have some leverage, they have something to offer. Pakistan has nothing to offer independently. So all it can do is convince the Americans that it's in their interest to do certain things and convince the Iranians that it's in their interest to do certain things as well, to avoid war, to avoid the expansion of war. Will President Trump accept Pakistan's suggestion that the blockade should be ended to continue with the talks? It will depend on what he considers to be in his interest. It will not be because Pakistan will then be providing him cover, just like Pakistan helped him get to a ceasefire, because after all his rhetoric, it was very difficult for him to accept a ceasefire or announce a ceasefire, and so Pakistan helped him get that cover. and all the praise he heaps on Pakistan's leaders is also to build up their stature within the United States so that he can tell his voters that, look, I'm doing this because of somebody who is really a good and useful mediator.
Sounds very transactional. The reporting this afternoon suggests that Trump has given Iran 3 to 5 days to come to the table before, in his words, the attacks resume. You know this administration and the people around it, as well as anyone in either capital. Is this a genuine deadline or is this a pressure theater?
So far, President Trump has not fulfilled or not stuck to any of his deadlines, so we do not know. He likes to bluff. And sometimes his bluff gets called, and sometimes he just extends things to be able to get his way. For a prolonged blockade, a lot more naval assets will require to be moved into the Gulf region, and that hasn't happened so far. You just described, or in a rather dismissive way, that President Trump is transactional, or it sounds very transactional, but that is the truth. President Trump is transactional. That is one of the reasons why he has some of the problems he has, both domestically and internationally. He does not have a philosophical, ideological, or even moral structure of thinking. He acts and reacts purely in a transactional way.
Right. Iran's foreign ministry today described its decision to stay out of talks as, and I quote, definitive. Bagher cited the blockade and the seizure of their vessel. He said it's war crimes, and the UN has been now formally petitioned. From your view, how much of this is IRGC-driven hardening after the Islamabad's first round? Or to put it plainly, who actually has the authority in Tehran to walk into a room and sign any proposed deal?
From all reports that one has read, it appears that the IRGC is very much in control of Iran, and they are the ones calling the shots. But in the end, obviously, they would have to have their political system, whatever there is in Iran, and the supreme leader on board. And it's not about who, it's about what. What can they agree to without repercussions at home? And I think that at the moment, that is a rather maximalist agenda, because the Iranian people have not been told the truth also about the extent to which Iran has been hurt during this war. So when your national narrative is that we are winning, 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 and then you agree to something that is less than winning, then that becomes a problem. So I think Iran has to calibrate that. President Trump has to calibrate that on his side. I don't see this process moving very fast. It will be a relatively slow and deliberate process.
Right. Let's talk about the Saudi-Pakistan dimension here for a moment. Riyadh has stayed relatively quiet, at least publicly, and showed a lot of restraint so far. But every Gulf capital knows that if Hormuz goes fully dark again for a longer time, they are the ones who pay. How much of this conflict has now shifted to Iran-Gulf dynamics as opposed to when it started?
It is very much Iran-Gulf dynamics. Look, the day Iran decided that faced with an attack by Israel and America, it will start attacking Gulf countries. And most of its attacks have been on civilian targets or infrastructure targets in the Gulf region, not just American targets. That was the moment when the Gulf dynamic came into place. So right now, there are multiple conflicts, and Iran will have to face the Gulf region for a lot longer than it is facing an American president willing to go to war on the suggestion of Israel's prime minister.
And you say this under the same American security umbrella or with some diversification?
I think that everybody is now looking at diversification in the Gulf region. The American security umbrella is not what it used to be anyway. And maybe there will be a reconsideration after this, as is always the case after wars.
Right. How much of Islamabad's mediation has the Saudi economic weight and Saudi diplomatic cover factored into all this? And does that change the Pakistani position in the ways that Iranian side is factoring its own calculations?
If there is a negotiated settlement, Saudi Arabia will definitely take credit as Pakistan's partner in a strategic mutual defense agreement. If Pakistan is not successful in getting brokering a deal between Iran and the United States, then obviously Saudi Arabia has kept its distance and it will continue to do so.
Ambassador Haqqani, a very basic question, because you said Pakistan has no leverage in all this. Why is Pakistan at the center of all this?
I think that Pakistan has basically positioned itself as the country that can do something like this. It has garnered international attention and positive international attention after a very long time. It gives Pakistan prestige, and Pakistanis as a nation care a lot about their prestige. Look, at the end of the day, even if there is a settlement between Iran and the United States, it does not bring any direct economic, political, or military benefit to Pakistan. It will only be the benefit of having been the prestigious interlocutor in stopping a conflict that would have taken a lot of human lives.
Last question. If the 3 to 5 day window closes without Iran at the table and Trump does what he has just said he will do, that is renewed attacks, more blockade, probably more Israeli cover in Lebanon, what is the Pakistani move on the day 6? Does Islamabad accept that it has done what it could do, or is there another version of this?
Look, I'm not privy to the details of what is happening behind closed doors, but if Pakistan does have a formula that it has already taken to the Iranians that is feasible from the Iranian point of view, and has taken from the Iranian side to the Americans that is feasible from the American side's point of view, and there are only details to be worked out, then Pakistan will continue with the process. It won't turn around and shrug its shoulders and say we give up. I think that Pakistan is now too deeply invested in this process to completely walk away from it. But events could totally override the opportunity of peace, as has happened in history many times.
Ambassador Haqqani, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was a pleasure having you. And the next piece of this picture is Lebanon. And Lebanon is the lever, if pulled hard enough by either side in the next 72 hours, collapses the Iran ceasefire before Washington's deadline even arrives. After the break.